I'm rich.
For a limited time, Tempo is offering our viewers 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/todaydaily. That is tempomeals.com/todaydaily for 60% off your first box. tempomeals.com/todaydaily. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is also sponsored by Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Home of the #1 checkout on the planet and the not-so-secret Shop Pay, which boosts conversions up to 50%, which means way less carts being abandoned and way more sales for your business. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, good marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify.
So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Basically, every band or record label that I buy merch or music from uses Shopify, and it is great for keeping track of those orders because a lot of times it's pre-orders. It's like, I need that hot red blue mixed vinyl. It's going to be here in 6 months, I promise. I've got an old man mush brain, so it's honestly super helpful having all my online orders tracked in one place. But you can upgrade your business and get the same checkout experience as those retailers by signing up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/itdaily, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/itdaily to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/itdaily.
Okay, back to the news now, and about that whole our allies are actually fucking pissed at us. They no longer trust our country, whatever.
You know, that whole thing.
Yeah. Well, you all remember J.D. Vance, right?
I don't know. He had a beard, right?
He did.
He had
I think he still does.
Okay.
He is, I guess, the vice president still.
I'd say like vice assistant to the vice president.
You'll fact check it.
Yeah.
But the Trump administration, they sent little JD over to Europe. On your way, JD.
Yeah.
While President Musk and Vice President Trump continued their work of dismantling the government. And Vance quickly got to work dismantling relations with our nation's greatest allies, attacking European countries on topics like free speech and migration. Here's the BBC. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has launched a scalding attack on European democracies, saying the greatest threat facing the continent was not from Russia and China, but from within. He spent the majority accusing European governments, including the UK's, of retreating from their values and ignoring voter concerns on migration and free speech.
The address was met by silence in the hall and later denounced by several politicians at the conference. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said it was not acceptable. Vance used his 20-minute speech to single out several European nations, including the UK. In his own speech, Pistorius directly addressed Vance, saying, "Democracy was called into question by the U.S. Vice President for the whole of Europe. He speaks of the annihilation of democracy," Pistorius continued. "And if I have understood him correctly, he is comparing conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes. That is not acceptable." The fallout of Vance's visit caused leaders of Europe's biggest countries to meet and assess just how the United States is acting. Yeah, we got to get a read on this.
Quick sidebar, everyone except JD.
Yeah. Let's go to Paris really quick and meet up. And yeah, that is, of course, including the effect that all of this will have on Ukraine as Trump attempts a quote-unquote deal to end the war, which, by the way, not a deal, just giving Russia everything. Doesn't seem like a good deal. Here's the New York Times.
The meeting in Paris was pulled together hastily after the first visit to Europe last week by Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, which left European leaders alarmed by both the tone and message of the new Trump administration and what it might hold for the continent. European leaders were shocked by the hostility of Mr. Vance's scathing speech in Munich, criticizing Europe's exclusion of far-right groups from power and the sudden American plans to begin peace talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia starting on Tuesday without the presence of Ukrainian or European leaders. Europe's security is at a turning point, said Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, on X after arriving in Paris on Monday. Yes, it is about Ukraine, but it is also about us. We need an urgency mindset. We need a surge in defense, and we need both of them now. The meeting, called by President Emmanuel Macron of France at the Élysée Palace, was an initial effort to discuss a more coordinated and collected response to the Trump administration. So the whole thing's a mess because essentially Trump and Putin are negotiating an end to the war, which basically it just declares Russia the victor and gives Ukraine nothing, while tasking all of Europe to protect Ukraine after that deal is reached. A deal that they have apparently no input on.
Yeah.
Seems like a bad deal.
So, yeah, that's cool. But now let's give you an update on New York City's criminal mayor, Eric Adams, who is a criminal no longer, at least temporarily.
He's no longer being prosecuted.
At least while he's in charge of New York, concrete jungle where dreams are made of.
That's right.
Yeah, but that's because he made a deal with the Trump administration and immigration officials so that the Justice Department would force prosecutors to drop the corruption case against Eric Adams.
Seems like quid pro quo.
Yeah, it's legitimately
Seems like extortion.
wild that this is happening out in the open. But once again, it's falling on the shoulders of career professionals who are so far unwilling to put their names and careers on the line in order to throw away an investigation into a compromised mayor and instead fully participate in a quid pro quo ordered by a convicted felon of the president. Now, only after several people have stepped down instead of dropping the case, the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, who had up until this point been fully supportive of the mayor, has said she's meeting with local officials to come up with some kind of path forward. I think the only path forward will be removing Eric Adams from office.
Yeah, it's tricky though because it's never been done. It is kind of it's a red line. It's one of those things. It's like how in the UK, like the king can technically like have the prime minister replaced or some shit, but like it's never happened because like that's crazy and it sets a precedent.
Yes.
Where any other governor, let's say in a red state, who has that same powers in the state constitution could be like, okay, well I'm just firing all the Democrat mayors that I don't like.
Yeah. But I mean, it benefits the Trump administration in both ways because they get Eric Adams, who is not even by choice, just has to go along with whatever he says. And on the other hand, if the Kathy Hochul, who's a Democrat, but you know,
yeah, she sucks.
but if she forcefully removes him, then yes, that also makes her look bad in the eyes of all of his supporters. So it's like
I think she should do it though, because like that. I mean, if any situation called for it,
it would be this. Yeah.
And also like the second you do that, like Trump loses all fucking leverage over the city and state of New York,
and it really makes him upset, which is also a bonus. Here's NBC News with the latest, and keep in mind these next resignations are on top of the ones that we mentioned throughout our two most recent episodes.
Yeah, it's been a real massacre. 4 of New York Mayor Eric Adams' deputies have resigned amid the fallout over the Justice Department's move to dismiss corruption charges against him last week and his cooperation with the Trump administration on immigration matters. Hours after the resignations were made public, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced that she would be meeting Tuesday with key leaders to discuss a path forward to ensure stability for New York City. In a statement, she also addressed the governor's constitutional power to remove a mayor. In the 235 years of New York State history, these powers have never been utilized to remove a duly elected mayor. Overturning the will of the voters is a serious step that should not be taken lightly, she said in the statement. That said, the alleged conduct at City Hall that has been reported over the past 2 weeks is troubling and cannot be ignored.
I would argue that the alleged conduct that took place far before that at City Hall was
also troubling
and shouldn't be ignored. But yes, the protests as a result of that are also troubling, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and it is, so like if she removed Eric Adams from office for being accused of a bunch of crimes, like that would be one thing, because it's like, okay, what about due process? But if she's removing him from office because the city government of New York literally cannot
operate,
function, that is, I think, an even better reason.
Yeah.
More justifiable, at least. The reporting continues. It adds that the deputy mayor's announcements add to a wave of resignations following the Justice Department's decision to dismiss the bribery and fraud charges against Adams. At least 7 Justice Department officials have resigned over the department's handling of Adams' case, including Manhattan's top federal prosecutor, Danielle R. Sassoon, who refused to drop the charges against Adams after Bove ordered U.S. prosecutors to do so. Bove being the 80-year-old millennial.
And Sassoon being a Republican, a conservative.
Yeah.
Who is just like, well, no, they got him dead to rights.
But you look at her, she looks great. She's like 30-something. She looks 20-something because she doesn't have the hate within her.
Well, she gets free access to all those beautiful Sassoon beauty products.
She does.
Vidal, Sassoon, hello.
Yeah.
Party up top. Anyways, finally today, Mexico is now saying that they will potentially file suit against Google over the Gulf of America name change because technically they control more of it.
They do.
The move was clearly done just to please the ego of Trump. Google did this just so they could be like, look, we're on your side. It's fine. We changed the name. It's cool. And again, like, this is a dumb thing to focus on. Outside of everything else that's going on, this is one of the dumber kind of things to focus on. But it is it's a test fire across the back, seeing what he can get away with. So, yes, it is important to push back on this. But here's the Associated Press with more. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said Thursday that her government wouldn't rule out filing a civil lawsuit against Google if it maintains its stance of calling the stretch of sea between northeastern Mexico and the southeastern United States the Gulf of America. Sheinbaum, in her morning news conference, said the president's decree is restricted to the continental shelf of the United States because Mexico still controls much of the Gulf. We have sovereignty over our continental shelf, she said. Sheinbaum said that despite the fact that her government sent a letter to Google saying that the company was wrong and that the entire Gulf of Mexico cannot be called the Gulf of America, the company has insisted on maintaining the nomenclature.
We will wait for Google's response, and if not, we will proceed to court, Sheinbaum said Monday during a morning press briefing. Mexico has argued that the mapping policy violates Mexican sovereignty because the U.S. only has jurisdiction over around 46% of the Gulf. The rest is controlled by Mexico, which controls 49%, and Cuba, which controls around 5%. The name Gulf of Mexico dates back to 1607 and is recognized by the United Nations.
And that's a major reason why the Associated Press originally was like, well, you know, we do news wires for the entire fucking world.
Yeah, it would be a little silly. Be like if anytime we talked about soda, we called it pop. Like, it's just not. It's a little bit rude. You're not going to do it.
The upper Midwest, I guess, would be very upset with you.
They would.
I did see, you know, a nice olive branch that was put out online in the past couple of days that says we should just include everyone. And we include, you know, let's say in this order, Cuba, the United States, and Mexico. And it could be the Gulf of Cum.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I think that's a nice, happy medium.
The funniest part of it is if it was called the Gulf of the Americas, I think everyone would actually be cool with it because especially in Latin America, they have a whole thing where they don't like that we call ourselves America because they consider America to be the description of the entire region. I feel like that would be a great compromise
yeah, but
for
that would
everyone.
Give
but
Trump the ego boost that he needs.
Yeah, Trump and people who love Trump would be like, what do you mean there's plural Americas? No, there's only one America, and it's number one.
But yeah, and as many have pointed out, it is very funny that they are so dang upset about people not respecting this name change.
Yeah, why are you dead naming my Gulf?
It's just frustrating. But we'll be here to deal with all this frustration alongside you and give it to you in a way that is, I guess, entertaining. Hopefully, or at least educational, something. Anyways, if you got anything out of today's video, please click the like button. It's the only thing that makes me happy. Please!
I need those likes.
Click the like button. Make sure you're subscribed. Leave a comment about whatever you want. I don't even care anymore. Make sure you watch our most recent videos. We got Weekly Weird News. We got News Dump. And we'll be back for some tech news. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Steven Crowder has come out with a new show that he's doing.
Yeah, J.D. Vance also at the Munich Security Conference was like, you know what the real problem is in Europe? That they're banning people for being Nazis. Unironically, he turned around and was like, you know, it's not Russia or China that's the greatest threat to Europe. It's actually the fact that you guys are too woke. Wokeness is actually the real threat to Europe. That's what he said. Le wokisme. Great stuff, man. Super sick.
And we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could...
Yeah, God, these guys are such ass, dude. Yeah, the values of liberalism and the commitment to liberalism is not being upheld. After all, liberalism means collaborating with fascism. And you're not doing enough collaboration with the fascists. You're not simply keeling over. No, the real threat in Europe is coming from within. It's le wokisme. Yeah, Europe is becoming too Soviet style. It's basically too leftist. Vance's message is that basically America is a democracy and Europe has turned into a Soviet Union that doesn't listen to its citizens and has too many immigrants. Quite a lecture. Yeah, this is the quote. The greatest threat to Europe comes not from Russia, but from commissars in Brussels and European governments, UK, Sweden, Germany. He says, stifle free speech. Comes back again and again to the canceled runoff of the Romanian election. If you can't understand this as straightforward, a rallying cry for Europe to become more fascist, I don't know what to tell you. If you don't see what I see here, I don't know. We must be living on totally different planes of existence.
Could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room,
this speech wasn't well received from what I'm seeing. I mean, yeah, but nobody wants to hear a lecture from this dumbass dude. But that doesn't matter because America still very much is the superpower. Although its influence and its soft power capabilities are diminishing, although its delicate alliances are becoming less strong, I guess, becoming weaker, ultimately, it still doesn't change the reality that it is the most dominant force on the planet as it stands. And as the most dominant force on the planet, what JD Vance is saying here might come across as a simple lecture, but the nefarious purpose for this lecture is terrifying for the future political prospects of the European Union. Because what he says here is what the American government wants to do in the near future. And they are kind of doing that already. Elon Musk making allegiances with nationalist and fascist movements all around the European continent is a truly terrifying prospect. Liberalism is dying. It's done. It's over. And I guess the question remains, will the liberals try to grip whatever remaining power they have and open up the floodgates of fascism in both Europe, as we are experiencing here in America as well? Or will they make allegiances with more radical left-wing elements, or even if there is any radical left-wing elements that remain in these countries? And I think the unfortunate answer is the former rather than the latter. That's what I think. At least historically, that's what they've done. And I think history is repeating itself again.
Or positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty.
Yeah, definitely. America, on the other hand, loved the blessings of liberty during the Cold War especially. They were doing so much liberation.
The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil.
By the way, just so you understand how obviously overtly hypocritical every aspect of this speech is, these guys have already implemented an anti-Semitism task force, and aside from doing mass deportations, they're looking to deport students on a student visa for the crime of being pro-Palestine, okay? So the notion that these guys have ever entertained free speech as anything but a weapon to wield to push for more and more fascist speech is ridiculous. That's all this is. Why is that a bad thing? This was such a great speech. America's so lucky. I hope America can save the EU. Clown Detected says, why is that a bad thing? Why is that a bad thing that JD Vance is lying when he says he cares about free speech when I just gave you an example of them not actually caring about free speech at all? Like, a lot of the initiatives that this administration has implemented directly undermine the First Amendment. If you can't comprehend that that is a bad thing, I don't know what to tell you. But what is the good thing? Wait, what? There is no good thing here. You're the one who said this is good. I said it's bad. You said it's good. I'm telling you that it's not good because they're actively lying. So what do you think is good? Oh, what I think is good. Abiding by a real commitment to political protest would be a good thing. Okay, allowing political dissent, no matter how much it undermines your agenda, would be a good thing. These guys don't care about that, and they never have. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to call me names, but your boss Elon Musk has called for a long prison sentence for CBS journalists for edits he didn't like. Did you not get the memo? Do you not agree with Mr. Musk on locking up U.S. journos? Hey, JD Vance, I know you're busy lecturing the Europeans on free speech, but have you seen this? Mr. Trump's decision to limit AP reporters' access is as much fight over the Gulf of America as it is a protest of what White House advisors say is years of liberal words choices that AP's influential style book has spread across mainstream media. Yes, dummy, I think there's a difference between not giving a reporter a seat in the White House press briefing room and jailing people for dissenting views. The latter is a threat to free speech, the former is not. I hope that helps. Why does JD Vance switch between talking like he's a epic bacon millennial liberal baby and also talking about how the new pope is actually the Antichrist? Like, he has two speeds. He's either like, we have desecrated the Eucharist or whatever, and then he just turns around and talks about how, why do the narwhals bacon at midnight? You dummy. Propaganda 60 Minutes allows Kamala Harris to lie when cameras are rolling. 60 Minutes are the biggest liars in the world. They engaged in deliberate deception to interfere with the last election. They deserve a long prison sentence. Great stuff, dude. From the real acting president of the United States of America. Very cool. To be fair, Donald Trump says stuff like this all the time too, so that doesn't make a lot of difference.
Civil unrest, the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet.
Like, that's the biggest threat to Germany and Europe. It's not Russia. Like, I mean, this like outflanks even their own other propaganda. When they turn around and say stuff like, oh, it's like, you're supposed to say, no, Russia and China are major problems for Europe. But he's like, nah, you know what the biggest problem for Europe is? You're not fascist enough, okay? It's just like silly aesthetic bullshit.
A day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted,
yeah, they're not doing enough Koran burnings, dude. That's the real issue.
Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
What the no, that, what are you? I don't even know what this is. Like, the problem is when conservatives do this stuff, they just flood the zone with a bunch of ridiculous, erroneous claims, okay? They flood the market, so you have to actively go through each individual thing that he's talking about and give additional details. But in terms of like Scotland is going to start prosecuting people for praying in their own homes if they're near an abortion clinic is so psychotic, dude. Yeah, that's just not correct, okay? They're not going to do that. What would be the purpose of that? He's just lying. And I think, I mean, what's interesting about a lot of this is that like lying is such a powerful tool. I think it's kind of underrated. I think lying is kind of underrated, especially when there's no one that's like willing to actively go up against the lie and be like, this is just a falsehood, especially when there's no universally trusted resource of information. Like mainstream media dying is truly awful in this regard. The public's confidence has been undermined. They don't care about mainstream resources, and you can just seek out alternative sources of information that basically correspond to your worldview and your biases. So now you could just literally turn around and be like, this is what's going on. They're going to start killing you if you even think about Christ. Basically living on every meme trope, unfair stereotype of Americans being ignorant morons. I looked to Brussels where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media. That's a whopper distortion of EU law. You can't shut down social media when they spot hateful content. If they could, there'd be no social media, which is a giant cess. But yeah, I mean, obviously they can't. In this country, Germany, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as a part of combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. So the irony here is that Germany actually does have incredibly restrictive speech laws, and they actively target pro-Palestinian demonstrators and brutally stop them. They have quite literally deported pro-Palestinian figures that come from other European countries, okay? They have barred entry of pro-Palestinian speakers. Of course, JD Vance is not going to talk about that. He's going to talk about some silly. Police didn't raid people for posting anti-feminist comments. They arrested 45 men for offenses including the following: threatening rape, threatening to post nude photos of an ex, demanding nude photos from strangers, distributing videos depicting torture of women. If JD Vance wanted to truly talk about some of the insanity happening in terms of like a lack of free speech in Germany, which obviously they have infinitely more restrictive standards for speech in Germany, he could have actually talked about a real story. Except he wants to do that in America, so of course he's not going to talk about that. BKR is the name of the Federal Criminal Police Office of Germany. BKR's raids were timed to mark International Women's Day last year. They didn't arrest a single person for anti-feminist comments. They arrested men for horrible criminal offenses. BKA, Bundeskriminal, part of the project. The BKA specifically searched for misogynistic postings with criminal relevance on online platforms. They were pre-assessed by the ZIT from a criminal law perspective, and after the suspected authors have been identified, were forwarded via the judicial route to the relevant public prosecutors' offices in the states in order to decide on an initiation of appropriate investigations. The basis for the initiative was, among other things, a ruling by the Cologne Higher Regional Court on June 9th, 2020, which confirmed that blanket denigration of women can be punishable as incitement to hatred under Section 130 of the German Criminal Code. Misogyny on the internet exists in many different forms. In addition to inciting hatred, the ZIT and the BKA were also able to identify postings in which women were sexually slandered and assaulted, in which so-called nude photos were publicly requested, in which rape and sexual coercion were publicly advocated, and in which torture and killing videos were publicly distributed. In Sweden, 2 weeks ago, the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Quran burnings. The Swedish government can't convict anybody. The Swedish court is independent of the government under Chapter 11, Section 3. Fined Salwan Najam £297, $374 with a conditional sentence. Chapter 16, Section 8 of the 1962 Swedish Criminal Code is below. It's a crime to express contempt against a group of persons due to their religious beliefs. Like, I remember some of the details of the Quran burnings that happen all the time in fucking Sweden and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, that's a hate crime. JD Vance just doesn't want hate crimes to be prosecuted. That's the difference. That's the difference. Most concerningly, our dear friends in the UK, where a British government charged a 51-year-old physio and army veteran with the heinous crime of silently praying 50 meters from abortion. Firstly, the British government didn't charge him with a crime, and silently praying is not a criminal offense. He was given a £100 fixed penalty notice by police on the day of the incident. Bournemouth City Council took him to court where he refused to pay the fine. Charge was failing to comply with Public Spaces Protection Order under the Antisocial Behavior, Crime and Policing Act of 2014, breached by where he deliberately chose to stand and what time he chose to stand there. A little later in the day, elsewhere, no problem. Like, from the American perspective, this doesn't make sense, okay? Because we don't have rules like this for the most part. And when police want to actually enforce an action, there's a million different ways to do so. You can say, oh, this is obstruction of justice. You can say, oh, this is trespass. Europeans have weird ass restrictions that are supposed to promote tolerance or supposed to prosecute intolerance, but not like actively prosecute it in the sense that like you're going to jail, but simply give you like a fine, okay? America is infinitely more ruthless in its criminal justice system in terms of like how we arrested, for example, 3,100 college campus protesters for the crime, which is not even a crime at all, or at least it's still not a crime yet, of offending the feelings of the big bad state of Israel that is also a small bean. We did that. And that was the Biden administration. In Europe, they're like, hey, if you, I don't know, pray around an abortion clinic at a certain time, yeah, you're going to get £100 fine. That's it. And then these guys understandably want to protest against it, knowing full well that it is red meat for the reactionaries. The law is titled Abortion Services Safe Access Zone, Scotland Act of 2024. The full act is below and doesn't take very long to read. There's nothing whatsoever in the Scottish legislation that criminalizes private prayer in your home. I mean, I could have told you that without knowing what that law was, because that would be an insane thing to advocate for. It's crazy your beliefs on this, the censorship of internet and freedom of speech. You should be advocating for this with your view on Hamas, etc. A big fan here, but this is a dumb take from you. Are you stupid? Is it difficult for you to comprehend that I just literally explained that all of these rules, or even in a country where there are restrictions against prosecution, they simply don't give a Do you not hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? I'm saying that European rules, European restrictions around speech are in some ways actually less restrictive than the American criminal justice system that is very heavy-handed in immediately engaging in mass arrest. Not a hate crime, it's a book. For sake, hate crime would actually be targeting a specific person. Okay, it's not a hate crime for sake. You're just simply burning a cross. Is that your argument? It's not, if it's not deliberately targeting a specific black person, as long as you're burning a cross in a public area, that's not a hate crime. What a great argument this is. Hey, excuse me, officer, I just drew a swastika. It's not a hate crime. It's not targeting a specific Jewish person. It's targeting all Jews. Great stuff. You don't even know what the standard for a hate crime is. Yes, we can burn flags, blocks, etc., but sorry, I can't. But a Quran, first of all, burning a Quran or removing the context and the nuance from the act of burning a Quran is hilarious in this instance, because it is akin to saying, oh, I'm sorry, we can burn flags, but we can't burn a cross. Okay? That's what you're simply stating, because there is additional symbolism surrounding this. Okay? Just so you understand. Or, oh, we can draw, I don't know, circles and squares on the side of the street, but we can't draw a swastika. It would be considered a hate crime. It's still a hate crime. Whether you want that hate crime to exist or not, or whether you want no regulations surrounding that sort of thing or not, doesn't change the reality that the intention behind it is very deliberately to spark hatred against certain marginalized communities. I don't know why every single person just simply across the board assumes that there is no nuance or context in these situations. You just like try to make a blanket statement and move on, thinking that I'm not going to be able to address it. We can say and do as we want as long as no one is hurt. Right to peaceful protest and speaking your mind. I know. I don't disagree with you, except the intention behind burning a Quran, and also simultaneously, as chatters from Sweden have correctly pointed out, saying all Muslims are vermin that must be forcibly removed from the country, is very clearly a little bit extra than just, oh, I'm against this religion, that's why I'm burning the Quran. That's why the act of burning the Quran is never specifically just an anti-religious act. Can you explain burning a cross versus burning the American flag? Yes, easy. Burning the American flag is a criticism and a protest against the nation state. Burning a cross is to say black people must be killed, because that's what it accompanied in the past and still to this day. When you burn a cross, you are going to engage in lynchings. It is a telltale sign to try to get stochastic terror to happen. Whether you are going to do it yourself or hope that others want to do it does not matter, okay? There's a difference between saying the American government when you are literally a part of the American government and you're, you know, utilizing the existing free speech laws and boundaries to criticize the American state with this radical act of protest is entirely different than utilizing the free speech laws to basically say, let's go kill some black people, dude. How sick is that? Yeah, obviously these two things are different. And I say this as someone who obviously benefits tremendously from the First Amendment that I guess, you know, the American government is still held on to. You're not giving good examples. Burning a cross is constitutionally protected in the U.S. Virginia v. Black. I'm not saying that it's an appropriate thing regardless, because it's still an incitement of hatred and it's accompanied by a litany of hate crimes regardless. In the same exact way, burning a Quran is. The purpose of a Nazi protest in a historically black neighborhood is not simply to exercise their difference in opinion and openly talk about their differences in opinion. It is to incite fear, okay? It is to incite fear to remind black people the racial pecking order. It plays the same role as, you know, putting up a statue of a Confederate general, for example, outside of a courthouse, which was common practice in the civil rights struggle that Americans engaged in. Personally, I think a lot of people have a liberal notion of free speech and don't understand that there should be some reasonable boundaries to it. And actually, they do personally agree to some reasonable boundaries to free speech. Every single person does. Free speech absolutism has very reasonable boundaries. That reasonable boundary is harm to others, inciting harm to others. That's precisely the reason why many other countries have differences in terms of like where their restrictions are. A lot of countries have hate speech laws, for example. In the United States of America, we have the most expansive, the less restrictive rules around speech. Part of that is because we are the dominant nation and therefore have, you know, historically clawed back some of the lack of regulation, okay? Like in times of war, we arrested people for being conscientious objectors. Famously, Eugene Debs is a great example during World War I. And in other circumstances, if you look at the McCarthyist trials and whatnot, or if you look at the fact that even to this day, it is technically illegal for a communist to ever be in charge of a labor union, okay? A card-carrying member of the Communist Party, or even the fact that the Communist Party is actually technically banned, even though it's not enforced. These are all fundamental violations of the First Amendment. None of you chirp about that. Many of you don't understand it. I will give you additional things that the American government has done in modern times as well. BDS laws, for example, in approximately, I think 32 states, if not more states, you have to sign. There are anti-BDS laws, basically. You cannot engage in boycotting and demanding divestments or demanding sanctions to the state of Israel if you want to retain any sort of job in these states, okay? That is an insane violation of the First Amendment, and yet nobody ever talks about that. Now, those are some bad violations of the First Amendment, both in principle and in theory. Having said that, however, there are some reasonable restrictions on free speech that many Americans also agree to. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater is the famous example that people use all the time. It's an example of incitement, okay, to cause chaos and panic. Another reasonable exemption from free speech is child sexual abuse material, for example. There's restriction on what kind of speech you can engage in or what kind of artistic expression you can engage in. Yeah, fighting words is another restriction as well, or at least does not offer you freedom from consequences. My point is, every single person, virtually every single person, agrees to restrictions to free speech, even in the United States of America. Otherwise, you would be a, you know, pro-CSAM liberation advocate. You'd be like, oh, you would want to allow CP to be created and distributed freely. My approach to the subject matter is that there are reasonable restrictions on free speech, reasonable limitations on free speech, and unreasonable limitations on free speech. And oftentimes, many of the Americans who claim that America has free speech, goddammit, don't realize that those are restrictions that actually harm the left historically and still to this day. And unironically like that, as a matter of fact. They like that it restricts the speech of radical leftists, okay? So anyone that says, oh, if they claw back some of these liberties, they'll come for you next. don't realize that they have been coming for us next. They've been coming for us yesterday. They've been coming for us today, and they will continue coming for us tomorrow. That's my advocacy. My advocacy is to be actually expansive in terms of protecting radical speech as long as it is pro-socialist, pro-communist, anti-imperialist. Genuinely to abide by those principles, which have been violated time and time again in glaringly obvious unconstitutional ways. So unconstitutional that Dianne Feinstein actively criticized the anti-BDS laws in, at the time, I think it was like 20 states. Now, apparently, it's in 37, as the chatter said. Like, that's ridiculous.
I guess it was last week at this point, AOC did a webinar informing people in her district and broadly of their rights if ICE comes knocking and tries to deport one of their family members or friends. And this caused a mass freakout on right-wing media. It's time, once again, for them to breathe new life into their psychosexual fixation with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And who better to do it than this, I don't know, this Harkonnen over
Obama
here.
appointee?
Yeah, the least articulate thumb in the world, who just basically decided that he wasn't going to leave Midtown Manhattan yesterday, and he went on Newsmax and like 6 different, I'm barely exaggerating, I think it was 4 different Fox News shows to talk about AOC. So here is Homan earlier in the day on with Bill Hemmer, who almost seems exasperated with him. He's the border czar, Homan. Not sure what authority he really has, except to just be a fascist in public for Donald Trump.
Heard you talking about AOC over the weekend. Do you believe she is breaking the law?
I'll leave that up to DOJ. What I find disturbing is that any member of Congress wants to educate people how to evade law enforcement. You can claim you're educating those constitutional rights. Okay, you can keep that claim. But what she in fact is doing, telling people don't open your door, hide in your home, don't talk to ICE. We're talking about people who are in the country illegally, committed a crime, they're a public safety threat, they've been convicted of serious crime, and they've been ordered removed by a federal judge. So it's like AOC and others don't want ICE to enforce the laws that they enacted. She's a member of Congress. Let us enforce the laws you enacted. That's what we're supposed to do.
You can't go after her. Do you think others should?
Crazy question.
No, I think I've asked DOJ, where's that line of impediment, of interference? And now if someone stands in your way, prevents you from arresting somebody, put your hands on you, that's impediment.
What?
But what line is telling people to hide from ICE, not open the door? Where do you cross that line on impediment? So I simply asked the Department of Justice, give us that line.
You have talked to them about this. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Wow. We'll see where that goes.
Wow.
Tom, I'm out of time.
Wow. So this is him saying essentially that he is directing the Department of Justice to look in one of Donald Trump's political enemies because AOC dared to have a webinar where she just explicitly delineated people's Fourth Amendment rights that prevents unreasonable search and seizure. I want to make sure that I have the exact wording correct. Yes, the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution is the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So that does require specificity about the warrant. Now, the Supreme Court has eroded this right over and over again, but you can, I mean, as the Trump administration flagrantly violates the law when there are judges telling, say, like Elon Musk, that he has no right to access the Treasury Department's most private information, and they're just doing it anyway. Now Homan is going to go on TV and say that he's directing an investigation by the Justice Department that's now currently extorting the mayor of New York City to enforce their immigration policies and raids. He's saying, well, because this congresswoman from the same city isn't abiding by what we want, well, we'll drop prosecution in one instance because we can force the guy to do what we want. But in the instance where this congresswoman is not abiding by what we want, yeah, we're going to try to prosecute her. That's basically what he's saying. I mean, the administration fully hasn't said it, but he's the border czar. He's a representative of the administration. He was on CNN saying the same thing. Here he is on Newsmax, you know, with his opinions about her intelligence. It's so weird how this guy.
He sounds like a bulldog that's been like inbred for 30 generations trying to breathe. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. This Rhodes Scholar it says.
It does look like he's wasting away, which is, you know, something we can all celebrate.
Yes. I mean, that would be nice. I would like to see that happen, maybe on air, live. He, of course, he's calling her dumb here. That's what you do when you're, you got to put down a strong woman.
Well, first of all, I think she's, you know, I won't go after her on
Mom, please do. Say what's on your mind. It's a holiday.
Look, she's the dumbest congresswoman ever elected to Congress, and she proves that every day. And
Just learn your words.
I can't believe any member of Congress, Republican, Democrat, Independent, would want to educate criminal illegal aliens who are in the country, been convicted of a violent crime, and have been ordered removed by an immigration judge after due process.
That's always a tell when they have to lean on the been convicted of a violent crime thing, because that's not, we know that that's not who they're going after. They think, this Nazi here thinks that being in this country undocumented is the violent crime. It's violence against whiteness.
Right.
And the Fox News, like he said, Hammer said, do you have anybody else going after her? That is a very dangerous thing to say in this country when congresspeople have been shot up by the right wing on that. And
Gabby Giffords was shot by a right winger. What was that, 10 years ago?
Exactly. And here's something for all the Nazis who think like this Homan guy has something to say. Undocumented people have rights, you stupid assholes. They have rights.
Yes, they do. And to bolster Matt's, well, let's finish what he has to say, and then I want to bolster Matt's point about who's actually being detained right now by ICE.
Violent crime, and have been ordered removed by an immigration judge after due process at great taxpayer expense. You got a congressman or congresswoman who does not want ICE to do the job that Congress has mandated them to do and funds them to do.
I cannot believe that this person has such little self-awareness that he just called her dumb. I mean, I can barely understand what what, you know, Humpty Dumpty is saying here, but
Called Radical by Mao.
this came out on Friday. This is actually, you know, a great. This is some of the folks over on Substack are doing really good work on immigration, because a lot of our mainstream media is not touching this, and they're just regurgitating the criminal talking point that that Matt just alluded to. So ICE's, according to Austin Coker on Substack, ICE's latest detention data shows growth of immigrants targeted with no criminal histories, exactly as predicted.
Who could have saw that coming?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, released new detention data today that objectively confirms widespread reports that ICE's enforcement surge has largely targeted immigrants without criminal convictions or criminal charges, contrary to the Trump administration's baseless public assertions. The data is clear on this point, and then Coker explains. ICE's detention data reflects the total detained population on a single day. It does not reflect the total number of people detained and released, blah, blah, blah. So they're just giving some background about the data, but you can see in this chart here the number of people detained by ICE, and you can see that escalation. As of February 9th, ICE's total detained population reached 41,169. ICE's total detained population is now higher than at any point in the Biden administration, and for the first time since the pandemic, those numbers have crossed 40,000.
It's interesting that CBP's numbers haven't gone up. It seems like ICE is more responsive to the incoming fascists than CBP.
Yes. This growth is due entirely to the people detained by ICE rather than by Customs and Border Patrol protection. So you can see, like, the border CBP would be at the border. This is basically about the raids.
Right.
The number of people booked in by CBP declined by 2,491, while the number booked in by ICE increased 4,422. It was the largest single bi-weekly increase in people detained by ICE since at early 2021, again in the pandemic. So that clearly indicates to you that despite them talking about their fears at the border, the number of detentions is declining there because they are reallocating their resources to raids of folks and terrorizing people. And then here it is with the criminal history. This is the chart that they tabulated. Immigrants with criminal convictions made up the largest group of people in detention at the start of the Trump administration, in no small part due to the laws around how ICE is required to detain, as well as the priorities of the Biden administration. That was a continuation of the of the Obama policy, which was deportations targeted towards people with criminal histories. That's what the Trump administration is claiming they're doing, but they're lying. The number of those individuals did go up from about 9,300 to about 10,500. The total number of people detained with pending criminal charges also increased, but the largest objective growth in people detained came from immigrants with no other criminal histories. This group increased by almost 2,000 in about 2 weeks. This group also grew proportionally from 6% to 14% of people all detained. And then I just want to get to the chart below, the bar graph. Here it is. Relative growth of detained immigrants by criminal history. Other immigration violators, 3.2 times growth of the others in the Trump administration.
And the convicted criminal thing can only grow so much because that's already been a point of emphasis for over a decade by all administrations. By
both Biden and Obama, and of course Trump. So you can see that the growth of the people who don't have either convictions or pending criminal charges is multiple times more than that of those with records or with convictions. So there you have it, folks.
And so if somebody said, for instance, that his main complaint, sorry to get into this, but there's commentators that I think should issue corrections on some of their statements. Cenk Uygur, January 27, said, the Colombian president started the fight on accepting undocumented immigrants back into his country. His main complaint was that they were coming on a military plane, and that's inhumane treatment. Good news, you can treat them as humanely as you like when you have them back. Did Trump threaten sanctions work?
Put that up. I want to read this.
Yeah, I'll put this in. I'll put it in Slack right here.
I hadn't seen this, so
this is the last time I respond to this, which is, I think, a heinous tweet. Frankly, disgusting at the time. Did Trump threatening sanctions work to resolve this? Yes, that's a fact. Was there much substance to the original complaint? To be honest, no. I think the real substantive fight is over who to deport. If they're convicted felons, their comfort on the plane is not my top concern. Now, everyone that had been following this knew that, not to grant the premise, that if the so-called, if they're convicted felons, their comfort on the plane is not my top concern. It is insanely discrediting that he even thought to tweet that out, because everyone knows that the rise is going to be in people who aren't. And now we have people like in Costa Rica and all these countries taking people, like, say, one story I think we saw in the news back today of a woman who was seen through a window being held at a hotel, and she held up a sign that says Afghanistan, and then she held up her hands to say to make a plane symbol, and then mimicked her head getting cut off, saying that if I get sent back to Afghanistan, I will be killed. That is happening all over because of this, and these people are not criminals.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I hadn't seen this particular tweet. It's hard to see anything on Twitter these days, but so the Colombian president basically had at this time rejected the usage of military planes that the Trump administration was trying to use to deport undocumented people back to Colombia because of the extreme history of U.S. military intervention in Latin America and what that would mean, and the fact that he didn't like that they were being treated as criminals when they were essentially just trying to come to the United States to make a better life for themselves and the Trump administration, didn't they basically capitulate on that? I forget exactly the details.
They eventually forced them to take the planes because they were much more powerful than Colombia is.
But yeah.
Well, with that too is it's sort of they interpreted that as if it was a victory when really they just kind of did what Petro asked them to do, which is officialize it by have the migrants on the military planes,
right?
And said it was just a victory because they threatened Petro with tariffs. Therefore, he said, okay, do it on the military planes, even though that's what usually how they would get those migrants there in the first place, which is on military planes as opposed to a chartered flight or something like that.
Right. And the second part that Matt read here about the top concern being people's comfort. Why is the top concern them not having comfort? I mean, this is the odd thing, it's
pandering.
Well, no, I mean, actually, I used to be, again, when I got hired there, I was a huge fan of their show for a while, and I remember back in the day, they did a segment about Anders Breivik, the killer in
Norwegian
Norway,
mass shooter?
or stabber, right? Or he was a
Breivik set off a bomb in Oslo, I think, right? Or maybe it was Sorry, I
can't remember, but he was a mass killer, horrific human being.
That went up and shot like a young labor sort of camp after he set up a bomb in one of the major cities.
It was a bombing and a shooting.
Yeah. And I remember he was. They showed basically the conditions of the jail that he is in, where he will be in for the rest of his life, but the court system there, you just have to renew it over and over again, so there's no life sentence, but he will be there for the rest of his life. And the fact that he had a TV and it looked like a dorm, as they do all across many prisons in Scandinavia, I remember Cenk was very unhappy with that. So I don't necessarily know if this is pandering. I do think it's just a difference in ideology where I do not believe that carceral punishment is an effective way to make us safer for the most part. If there are dangerous criminals like Breivik, as long as they are kept away from the rest of society so they don't commit mass atrocities, I do not believe that they should be held in inhumane conditions. We know that solitary confinement is regularly used against prisoners like, say, Chelsea Manning or other people who may, God forbid, read a magazine, which literally drives people insane and has no positive effect on society. That's what our prison system is like. It's a system of abuse as opposed to one that is oriented towards rehabilitation. So my point here is that I don't actually think it's pandering. I do think it's a difference in ideology where one, he's pandering by granting the premise that these are criminals, which we just showed the data that they're obviously not. But it's a difference in between, a more right-wing reactionary viewpoint, which is what that show is now, and one that's based in humanism and about creating structures that aren't about inflicting pain really on anybody, but about keeping us all safe.
Yeah, because Emma, quick questions. Do you know where MS-13 came from?
It is a gang from
U.S. prison system.
Oh,
do you know where Tren de Aragua came from?
U.S. prison system?
Venezuelan prison system. It turns out that just caging people in mass doesn't actually solve the problems that some of the same people like to think are the most important and urgently addressed. It turns out that prison might actually be a networking opportunity for criminals.
Yes, I think that's kind of well established, but people pretend not to care because they like the punishment aspect.
Exactly, and also there's an audience ready for sort of pro-mass crime stuff, which we've witnessed even before in so-called independent media, investor-taking media, and the mass media. They love to lead with these sorts of stories.
Well, let's take a call, and then I wanted to do this federal worker story, which is really important, but I've had some folks on the line for a second. Calling from a 585 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
This is you.
Hi, this is Brandon from Rochester. I called in before, I think, and at the time you suggested, or I wanted to debate Sam before, and you said you could take down my number to greenlight that. I'd probably call back in later in the week if you're still open for that.
He's not here this whole week, but you can call in next week if you want to debate him in particular.
Sure. Yeah, I'll probably do that.
All right.
Sure. Yeah, besides that, the only thing that I knew that I don't know if you guys heard, I don't think I heard you read him today, but Express VPN is unfortunately owned by Cape Technologies, which is a technology firm owned by Teddy Sagi, who's an Israeli billionaire who made most of his money by founding a gambling software support company. So,
okay.
Unfortunately, he owns shit tons of stuff. I didn't know it, but my VPN, who's a different provider, which I thought was decent, is also owned by him. So he owns loads of shit.
Okay, well, we're writing that down now, and we'll make sure to flag it. Thanks for letting us know.
Yep, cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I mean, generally when it comes to that stuff, it's less about the nationality of the people than if they're on explicitly the BDS boycott list.
Yeah. To be honest, that's kind of the guide that we use, but this is a little above my pay grade, but we did write it down.
Or if they're, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure actually the West Bank making company, the West Bank linen company was actually on the BDS list.
Yes, that's why we said no to them. Ryan and Callie, Anders Breivik's cell is better than my apartment, but as long as he's unable to murder children, I'm okay with that. Right, exactly. Dave from Jamaica, I'll be honest, Jank, like a lot of people, confuses toughness with effectiveness. Portland Pete, also someone being a convicted felon doesn't mean it's okay to treat them poorly. Democrats get way too excited about making bad people suffer. It's wrong.
Oh yeah, remember how people thought the calling Trump a convicted felon thing was going to work? Did that work?
Yeah, it didn't work great.
Didn't do nothing.
Jerry at the beach, this Tom Homan guy looked like he shit on the television today, slurring his words, bald head, looking extremely thumb-like, very, very disrespectful. Company Townie, it's wild to call AOC the dumbest person in Congress when Boebert and MTG exist. Yeah.
Looks like Droopy Dog.
He does. He does look like that. Teacher Dan 20, my grandfather had a cleft palate in his face. His upper lip looked a lot like that, even worse, and his voice sounded a little like that, even worse. I have no doubt this guy is an asshole, but don't pick on the way he talks.
Homan have a cleft palate? I don't notice that.
Beg to differ. I mean, I'm sorry. This was the same thing with, like, RFK, I understand, Jr., I know he has an affliction, but you cross a certain level of being a bad person, I'm going to make fun of you about everything.
Yeah.
Sorry. Obvious books. Obama was the first to appoint Tom Homan and even awarded him a citation. I remember. Yeah. Al Sonic from Pittsburgh. I want to warn that Zuckerberg may run for president. He explored this in 2017. He went to a farm in Iowa. He's obsessed with the Roman Emperor Augustus. Is that why he had that haircut before? He's truly scary. A friend of his has stated he wants to be an emperor of the world. I guarantee he gets divorced and runs as a Republican. He definitely seems like he's getting divorced, but he's like arguably more uncharismatic than Elon Musk.
Wait, who are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, Zuckerberg is not going to be the nominee for president. DSA Aaron in Atlanta, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are even better than AOC, but they are more brown, so it could never happen. Well, also, Rashida Tlaib could run, but Ilhan Omar was not born in the United States, so she can't run for president.
Indiana voted for Barack Obama. Like, I think people need to stop overemphasizing things like women can't win or brown people can't win in this country. I think it's somewhat self-defeating.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say women can't win, but I would say that I think it's important to recognize how more limited many women in a traditional political context may feel expressing themselves, and how there may be reflexive reactions to them that are still deeply ingrained. I mean, as Sam says, when he was a kid, his mom couldn't get a credit card in his name. It's not a shock that there are some people who can't reflexively see a woman in an authority position, but it does, I think, depend on the campaign. Like, if AOC were to run on a campaign that will change people's lives, she's going to face an incredible amount of sexism, as she does, as we just played with Tom Homan. But can that transcend that? I mean, that is an open question to me.
I think in order to be a first, you need to actually have some offering people something. I think Obama offered something. I think the two women who have been at the top of the ticket were maybe two of the worst politicians in my lifetime, and they shouldn't have been. And it was a failing of the party to elevate them into.
But Biden was a horrible politician, and he beat Donald Trump.
But Biden was running on stuff. Biden ran on a public option. Like,
he said he would veto Medicare for all.
That's
in that
true,
race.
but he ran on a public option.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Build Back Better, $1 trillion thing, PRO Act, like all this stuff was de-emphasized. And also, you know, I think.
But the nature of the attack is so different. Like, I mean, Biden gets this inherent baked-in credibility when I don't know if Hillary Clinton's campaign was that dissimilar from his. I mean, Kamala's was more conservative. I would agree with that. But she incorporated some of Sanders's policies into her platform, and like
Clinton ran saying, "Don't look into my speeches to Goldman Sachs." Like, I think she couldn't have been worse for that moment.
Biden ran and said, what, like with the immigration stuff, what, you know, go to Trump, he'll deport you. Like, we could come up with a million different examples, but I just think it you know, what, our audience is 82% male, right? I just saw this statistic the other day. If you're a woman watching this show, right, I think that there's probably, you know, that you probably understand a little bit about how you have to essentially tailor your speech to fit into certain boxes. It may not necessarily be the case, but that is how American politics functions, in that you can't be too aggressive or you're seen as a bitch. You can't be too emotional or you're seen as unfit to lead. And there's very little room to navigate in the middle of that. And I think both Harris and Clinton were hampered by it. But Hillary had more baggage, and Kamala's campaign was more uninspired. I don't know.
I think that's, again, like, I think you do need to be, in order to be a first and break one of these barriers, you do need to be an exemplary candidate. But I also, like, can't help on this topic remembering that Bernie Sanders was smeared in 2020 as a sexist for allegedly having a similar sort of concern. That, I will say, you can go back, I thought was overblown if that was sincere concern of his at the time. But look, I agree that we should be able to have these conversations, but I think the way that they're deployed is dangerous, because it wasn't, we need to take this seriously when Bernie was supposedly saying to Elizabeth Warren, it was, look at that sexist. But
the way that it's deployed on the internet is different than how normal people are engaging with it, which I think, you know.
I mean by the party, though.
Well, the party, they're going to use it all as an excuse. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't, at the same time, talk about the, like, undergirding reactionary moment of, like, sexism and misogyny that we're in right now, which I do think is informing a lot of the politics, as it did with the rise of the Nazis, when it was a third of the population was unemployed, and Hitler and the Nazis talked about this renewed sense of masculinity, which gave these men purpose, and then also gave them benefits to keep the women in the home so they could produce Aryan children. This is not a new thing. And in a country like ours, you know, when we see women leaders across the West get elected, with Scheinbaum being a notable exception, they're either conservatives or they're centrists. What's the leftist female leader in the West that has gotten elected under a patriarchal, like, Christian society? I mean, it's very rare. We have such a dearth of female senators too. So there is, and I can say from personal experience, a harder time sometimes getting your perspective taken seriously as a woman, where it's seen as, like, when they would say about Kamala, she has no details. I mean, she didn't have a vision, but she had way more details than Donald Trump. Trump came out there and said they're eating cats and dogs. And I mean, and, you know, I just want to make sure that, and with the Bernie thing, Bernie, of course, wasn't the sexist, but there was sometimes, like, there's a style, there's a militancy and an uncompromising nature, which is a good thing in any leftist political movement, but that can sometimes feel a little bit like women don't understand necessarily what their place is in that movement. And I'm still struggling to try to find a way to, like, I don't know, make that a part of my coverage in a way that also doesn't validate the bad faith concerns that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, does this impact your AOC 2028 stuff? Because it doesn't for me. If she wins the primary, I'm willing to go to bat for that.
I think she could win based on what we're saying, because she could have an agenda that's transformative, and then, you know, the issues that we're talking about matter less. But I also, you know, I don't want to belittle it, because I do think it's a real thing, and, you know, particularly reflective of, like, I don't know, some things that I think the left could work on, being more inclusive in that way. Dave from Upstate says, Emma, did you ever consider you lack a mission? I did not consider that. DSA Aaron in Atlanta said there were Bernie bros that were sexist, but Bernie wasn't. Exactly right. I mean, but there were going to be sexists in all, like, Biden was sexist and racist in the way that he put Kamala in the corner and didn't actually groom her to be his successor. He used her as a prop and then moved on with his life. These are just very insidious things that are, it's, as Sam would say, it's harder sometimes to identify misogyny than it is racism.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.
Today we're going to talk about a few things, and they're going to surround Ethan Klein. So we're going to go into Ethan, we're going to go into Hassan, we're going to sit through Ethan being misogynistic, racist, anti-Semitic. And the reason we're doing this is because I saw a clip on Twitter of him going on a rant about his housekeeper, his Hispanic housekeeper. And I just did not care about Ethan Klein. I did not care about Hassan. I didn't know anything about them, but it bothered me. And so here we are. We're going to start with a video of Ethan Klein talking about Hassan's undocumented housekeeper, who turns out to just be Hassan's mom. Turkish mom who's really good.
But anyway, it wasn't his mom. You've explained to me the situation. But anyway, it wasn't his mom. Because I was shocked, frankly, when I saw her. So I asked.
I didn't get that at first. Okay, cool. So the edited VOD, the one that they put out, cuts from this clip to the other person talking. However, the original is just Ethan continuing to go on. All right, and that took me a minute.
Asked some questions. I was like, have you, like, is she? I think she's undocumented, which is I don't know for sure, but that was my impression, because he said he got the recommendation from someone he knows. And not that there's anything, in my opinion, wrong with hiring undocumented workers for certain things, but it's funny because people say, oh, Ethan's being sued by his employee, and now he's talking about Hassan has a migrant. Well, I'll tell you this, at least my employee can sue me.
Well, his employee's his mom, and she's not actually working. She's just kind of there. Let's talk about the lawsuit against Ethan Klein. Ethan Klein is being sued by one of his employees, I believe his housekeeper, and we'll get to it in a minute, because she suffered a hernia, asked for 2 days off, and then he fired her.
His undocumented worker has no legal recourse. He's just got to shut up and fucking smile.
That is an interesting point. Like, I understand, like, so,
if I really wanted to take advantage of people, I would have gone and got myself an undocumented worker to clean my house.
Right. So you've explained to me the situation with your former.
So the obvious feeling is that he cut that out because he called Hassan's mom his undocumented worker, realized it was wrong, and then cut it out. However, I feel like he cut it out because he said his employees suing him, and that's out of great luck. Prior to sitting down and making this video, I watched a lot of clips on Ethan Klein just to kind of see what he was like. I get no good vibes from the man. Everything I've heard him say is awful, and I'm not going to get specific because we're going to get to it. I don't think he cares about talking about other content creators in a bad way. If you're a big content creator, you have opinions on other big content creators, go for it. What do I care? I don't care about Hassan. I don't care about Ethan Klein. They want to go back and forth. That has nothing to do with me. But I care a lot about the way that people speak about regular people. People whose lives are a few $1,000s away from being completely destroyed. That does not apply to these people. These people can say and do whatever they want, and their bank account is still going to go up 7 figures this year. I don't understand the part of you that takes that as an excuse to badmouth people who, without them, you would be nothing. I guarantee you there are more people in Ethan's stream who are probably undocumented people in the United States than there are people in there who are millionaires like him, which is a weird thing to think about, but people tend to stick by people they want to have faith in.
I met her. She's a lovely Hispanic lady.
And I haven't been losing a lot of weight except for the past couple of weeks. Like, the more proximity I have to my parents being here and living with me, the easier it gets to actually lose weight. People are saying that people can't buy these on the website. That's my brother.
Oh, your bro.
Yeah.
She doesn't speak English. She cleans and cooks, works full-time, I believe. Hassan grunts and uses Google to talk to her.
My dad communicates in the United States of America with grunts, okay? Outside of the house, first of all, he's only speaking Turkish. But outside of the house, he's just grunting. Like, he never speaks English. He can speak English, refuses to.
Okay.
She seems to not be on his utopian socialist pay plan, where everyone is entitled to the means of their production. She frees up a ton of time for Hassan to stream, works in his home, very clearly part of his production. Judging for what I saw, she's probably making slightly above minimum wage. It just shows the obvious hypocrisy and total insincerity of Hassan's socialism. He also tells everyone that visits to never mention her for, quote, obvious reasons. Literally, I don't care about sharing anything confidential because it's pretty clearly expressed our friendship was a farce.
There's so much and so little happening.